Joining us live now to discuss this and more is the Liberal Senator, the Victorian Liberal Senator Jane Hume. Jane, good to see you this morning. Let's just start off with your reaction on this Monday morning to those protests yesterday in Melbourne.
They were very confronting indeed, Pete. You know, we knew from the start, the moment that these protests were being organised, that there were some characters behind them that were unsavoury. Now, Australians have the right to peacefully protest, but peaceful is the operative word there. And police, unfortunately, were put in harm's way yesterday because those protesters got out of hand. Now, in Victoria, it does seem that it was the worst behaviour was seen. I'm not at all surprised. As Victoria, my home state and my hometown of Melbourne, seem to have turned into the protest capital of Australia. There have been numerous protests up and down the streets over the weekends, the pro-Palestinian protests. I think this has been somewhat of a backlash to those protests, which is a terrible shame, but there's no room for violence. We are a peaceful nation, we are a multicultural nation, a very successful one at that, and we should be embracing that.
When you say it's a terrible shame that those protests took place, I mean, like you point out, when you have these pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protests in Melbourne every weekend, coupled with mass immigration, housing unaffordability, is this sort of pushback inevitable?
Well, there's frustration in Victoria, certainly, because economically we're so far behind the rest of the country. Our unemployment is higher, our antisocial behaviour is becoming more and more prevalent, crime is increasing. There is frustration that is brewing on the streets, and unfortunately I think some of that manifested yesterday in those anti-immigration protests and the pro-Palestinian counter-protests that were occurring at the same time. Unfortunately, though, it's police that are the ones that are caught in the middle. I want to thank the police officers in Victoria and indeed right around Australia for doing their job so well yesterday to try and keep those protests under control.
Folks will argue, and I'm sure that they're doing that already, folks will argue, why is this one so unacceptable, whereas the other one that happens every weekend, which shuts down cities, shuts down key bridges as well, is allowed to continue?
Well, all peaceful protests should be allowed to continue. The question is whether they are, the intention of those protests is to make a point or whether it is to make mayhem. And I think that yesterday we could see from the organisers that they intended to cause trouble. That is a real concern. But I speak every day to business owners, particularly those in the CBD, whose businesses have suffered because of the continual protests up and down, particularly around the top end of Bourke Street in front of Parliament House. There are a series of restaurants in particular and retail outlets there that are being damaged each week, that are being vandalised, whose customers are walking away because they don't want protests outside where they're supposed to be having a nice lunch.
So should they all be stopped?
Or shopping. That's outrageous. Well, there certainly needs to be something done. And look, the Victorian Coalition have already made moves to do that. They think that there should be permits to protest. I think that's a terrific idea and something that should be considered, because it's got to the stage now where Victoria is the protest state. That should be on our licence plates.